You know, for those of you that don't have two or three sons, I highly recommend it because when you get a call from the preacher that says, "Hey, can you fill in today?" Sure is nice to have some people to defer to in a couple of cases. See if we get this computer working again here this afternoon and get our lesson working here. So this afternoon we're going to be taking a look at the Red Sea crossing. It'll be found in Exodus chapter 14. This, I think, is, if you look at it very closely, there's a lot of biblical evidence that I don't know, I'm constantly questioning things to be sure that they're from God. There was a time in my life when I was younger, I would say to myself, I wonder if all these stories that you read about in the Bible were really real accounts of things that happened, or are a lot of the things, especially the stories that Jesus told, or are they just stories, just parables? Well, as I've gotten older, the evidence is overwhelming that a lot of these things really took place and they happened. And this is another such story that we're going to unfold today. So let's take a look at the crossing of the Red Sea here. We're going to start in Exodus 14, starting in verse 1. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-Hahiroth between Magdal and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart.'" And, let's just stop right there for just a moment. So let's just put into perspective a little bit of what we read there. And I don't want to read through this so quickly that sometimes we lose the story of this. But this is picking up where Moses is taking the people out of Egypt and they're leaving. So they've been through the plagues. Pharaoh has said, "Okay, I give up. You guys are free. You can go." God wins. Well, the Israelites are getting out into the desert area and they're heading toward the promised land. And you don't necessarily pick up on here in these first couple of verses that God is unfolding a biblical battle strategy that's fixing to take place here. But to the people that are involved in this is a horrible looking battle strategy that we'll begin to see that God is unfolding here. So it even looks like to Pharaoh that it says here that the Pharaoh will think the Israelites are just wandering around the land in confusion. So they're not heading out in such a way that if you are trying to flee and escape, you've got a good escape route planned out right here. So Pharaoh's kind of still monitoring you're talking about thousands of people that are leaving out of his country that were his servants, and they're going about their leaving in such a way that Pharaoh's starting to think, these guys act like they're lost out here. They don't know what in the world they're doing walking around out here. So that's starting to help harden Pharaoh's heart again, that he's rethinking letting them go. Then the Lord says there in verse 4, he says, "And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. So you can see that Pharaoh's heart, yes, the Lord was allowing it to be hardened, but even before God said, "I'm going to harden his heart," we can see that Pharaoh is already starting to think among himself, "You know what? I'm having second thoughts about letting these guys go. They're too dumb to even escape. They don't know what they're doing out here. Well, let's see how that continues to unfold. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariots made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of his best chariots, along with the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. All right, so we can see there, okay, he took together about 600 chariots and men and his army, and he said, "You know what? We made a mistake. What are we going to do, start waiting on ourselves around here? I mean, who in the heck's going to get me my, morning cup of coffee, that I want every morning and take care of everything for me?" Well, you can see where in a situation like that, it wouldn't take too much to harden somebody's heart, especially somebody who's used to being the king, and he's waited on hand and foot by people, and you realize, man, we just fired all the servants around here. We're going to have to start waiting on ourselves and totally regroup. Well, I'm sure it didn't take a whole lot of persuasion to make them say to themselves, "We need to go back and round all these people up." Now, you're talking about an army going out against an unarmed army. Now, a lot of times we don't think about it, but Israel, they had enough manpower. I mean, they could have picked up sticks and rocks and been an army. I mean, when you're talking about just hundred thousands of people, men, women, and children, well, that's a pretty good mob that's moving out of a city, trying to head to anywhere. So they were another army in themselves. Unfortunately, they didn't have any real armor or anything to try to really defend them with compared to what Pharaoh would have had. So we'll read on a little bit more here. It says, starting in verse 10, "As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, 'Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Did we not say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert.' Moses answered the people, 'Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still.' Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and his army, through his chariots and his horsemen.'" So we see a situation here where I think this is pretty interesting, and I had not picked up on this before I read through this again. As Moses is going through the plagues and the steps to get the Israelite people free, there in verse 12 it says, "Did we not say to you in Egypt, leave us alone? Let us serve the Egyptians." So, there were some of these people that they had gained their freedom by God and Moses being his servant and doing those plagues and the things that they went through. They were thinking to themselves, man, I can't believe it. They just got us freed. We were a whole lot better off living in Egypt, being slaves for those people, than we would have ever been having to wander around out here through the desert. And it's no wonder some of them would have looked up and thought to themselves, man, look, here comes the whole Egyptian army. What are we supposed to do now? Moses, what's going on? And they say things like, had they run out of burial places for us in Egypt? Wasn't any place to bury the bodies? You going to hide us out here somewhere? Those are the statements of people that you wonder how in the world they ever got themselves saved. Those are just some of the most ludicrous statements that you really have to wonder, what was God thinking when he chose these people? Well, he did have a plan. Part of the plan is Moses says to him, he says, just stand still and watch. You're the most pathetic army that the Lord could have ever chosen to try to go up against Pharaoh and all of these men. But you're not going to do the fighting. God is. And God's going to show, look, I can take the most pathetic looking group of warriors you ever seen in your life that would be an army, and I'm going to turn them into the most feared nation that's ever been seen. Well, let's read on a little bit more. We'll see how some of that begins to take place. It says there in verse 18 that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud had moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other, so that neither went near the other all night long. Now, that's a pretty interesting thing that happened right there. As the Egyptians are moving, apparently there's an angel that is moving with this group. And there's a cloud that it's saying, like a pillar of a cloud, that's kind of leading this group. Well, at this point, they've kind of got themselves boxed in to an undefendable position for the Israelite people. So if you've got one of the Bibles that a lot of times in the back of it has got the little maps that you can find in the back right there, if you'll find you one in there when you get an opportunity that shows the Red Sea in there. Well, you'll see the Red Sea coming up from the bottom of the page there, and it kind of branches off into almost what you see like a Y at the top of it. Egypt would be off to the left side of that Y. So most of Egypt takes up the whole left side of that map of the Red Sea. Now, it's thought that the Israelites coming out of Egypt were coming out down into the Y. So that as they're coming down into the Y, they're going to be trapped by two bodies of water, which will be the Red Sea as it's branching off, one going into a river this direction, one going into a river the other direction, and you're in an undefendable position with nowhere to go. Well, it's not known 100% exactly where the trail of the Israelites went, but based on some things that we'll read about here a little bit later, and some of the description of where it was saying that they were at, that's the typical area that they thought to have been moving into. So they're in an area here where, from Pharaoh's point of view, he's got them trapped. There's nowhere to go. So you're backing yourself up to the ocean, and there's mountains and desert, and you're in a horrible position to try to defend yourself. They don't have the high ground, I guess you'd say, so to speak, from a military vantage point. Well, that's exactly where God planned them to be. Now, it seems like from a worldly predicament here, they're in a horrible spot. But it's a great spot to show the magnitude of God, of how you can save anyone that you want to if you're God. So, as this begins to unfold, I think if I was the Pharaoh, this whole light and dark thing would have just deterred me right off the bat if I'd been part of Pharaoh's army. Because, the Israelites are standing over here in an area that seems to be lit. And we're standing over here in an area that seems to be dark. And there's a cloud and an angel somewhere in the midst of this. I'm thinking I'm starting to get the heebie-jeebies and a little nervous about that. I think I would have wanted out long before we would have been like, let's keep advancing. But nevertheless, as the Bible says, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and I imagine that he was emboldened. He is the king. No one defies the king. He's used to, I get what I want when I say what I want. Well, that's kind of the point that they were at. So, as that was beginning to unfold, it says in verse 21, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, and it turned into dry land. The waters were divided. The Israelites went through the sea to dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Now, that's an amazing miracle, boy, I would have loved to have seen. I mean, you're literally walking through divided waters. I mean, how deep is an ocean? I mean, this is the Red Sea. But, I mean, if you were to, part the Yadkin River over here, I'd be pretty impressed with that too, if you could make that happen. But much less at the farthest points of some of the Red Sea, I mean, you're talking about miles that this thing has been parted, and it's dry land right on the bottom, ready to walk across. But now you can imagine that's still pretty scary. I don't care who you are. I mean, you're walking through and you see water on either side of you. It's got to be cleared big enough that you could get an army through this, as well as we know Pharaoh with his chariots and horsemen and things like that. So it's a pretty big roadway, basically, where you've cut this sea in half, that you're able to just walk right through that. Well, to add on top of that, that it's dark. This happened at night, but I don't know if from the Israelites' vantage point it still seemed pretty bright because, they were divided by light and dark. So God may have been in some way giving them light that they could see, but from Pharaoh's point of view, he's probably walking into this in the dark, which seemed like it would have deterred me again as well. So picking up in 23, it says, The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots come off, so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, Let us get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the seas, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and their horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The waters flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Now, you know, another interesting thing that I found out when I was doing a little research about this area is in this area of the Red Sea can reach depths that's almost 2,200 feet deep in some places. Now, even at 1,000 feet deep, that would be a massive decrease down to the ocean floor of dry land to go across. But you know, in this particular area of where they believe that Moses was most likely to have crossed the Red Sea at, in this area, which is one of the shortest places that you probably could have crossed, the bottom of the ocean rises up to like a mountain underneath there. And it comes up, they're saying probably within 16, 20 feet in that area. And it's one of the few places only in the Red Sea that's that shallow. Now, they've also researched in that area, and they've had divers go down. And you know, the coral that is in that area, you know what it's shaped and it looks like? Wagon wheels, chariots. And strangely enough, coral doesn't stick to gold. And any of the gold chariot wheels that were there have been uncovered, some of them, and they're still found. Now, it's with those things that the stories of the Bible become the realities of your world that you live in. They almost become undeniable that how could the Bible that was written so many years ago about a story ever hold true with anything that we might still find in the world today? Well, I mean, where did all of these wagon wheels and things that got into that area of the Red Sea come from? I mean, you know, somebody just driving a boat out there dropping off wagon wheels? Not likely. You know, it begins to make it difficult to say, well, that's just Bible stories. As I heard a preacher say one time, we need to stop telling our children Bible stories and start telling them the Bible facts. Because the school systems are very popular to tell the kids their version of facts, and a lot of times we're just telling stories. As we conclude on through this, it says, that day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. It's kind of a short lesson here, but, you know, I recommend, just like the Israelite people did of that day, well, the same miracle that they saw done, we can confirm was done, and is just as good of a reason to put our faith in God, just like they put their faith in God. And hopefully, if there is anyone that has not done that, or they have stepped away from making that a priority in their life, I can assure you it's a whole lot better with God than not with God. And I really feel like today that in today's world, God will let you harden your heart just like he did Pharaoh, if that's what you choose to do. But what God would prefer to do is not to harden your heart, but to prick your heart with the Word of God. And hopefully, you would allow that to grow within inside of you and give you a true foundation to build a better, happier life with God than against God. Again, if there's anyone here this afternoon who has of any need, for any reason that you would like to allow God into your life to become the foundation that you need, now is that time. Now is that opportunity. If for any reason you have strayed away from God, you've hardened your heart at times, and you need to turn back from those things, again, now is that time. You have no guarantee that the waters of life will not come crushing down on you at an unforeseen moment. You want to do something before the waters come in around you and it's too late. If we can help in any way, again, we encourage you to come as we stand and sing